Chapter 7. The Last Encounter. The days following the ritual in the cemetery brought a calm that seemed almost unreal to Emily. Silent Creek, for the first time in months, was at peace. The nights, once filled with thick fog and eerie silence, were now clear and serene. There were no more reports of disappearances or sightings, and people began to return to their normal lives, relieved of a burden they hadn't fully understood. But despite the apparent peace, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was still left unresolved. Since that night in the cemetery, an incompleteness gnawed at her, as if, despite everything they had done, part of the story remained unfinished. She tried to ignore the feeling, convincing herself that it was all truly over, but the restless nights and persistent thoughts wouldn't let her find peace. Then, one Sunday afternoon, while walking through the streets of Silent Creek, something unusual happened. Emily passed by the old Whitmore mansion, now completely abandoned. The windows, once covered in ivy, were broken, and the doors were boarded up with wooden planks. She stopped in front of the rusty gate, feeling a strange urge to approach. Her feet carried her to the gate, and as she reached out to touch it, a cold gust of wind blew past her, making her step back. At that moment, she saw a figure in the second-floor window. It was a female silhouette, dressed in white, with blonde hair blowing in the wind, even though there was no wind at all. Emily froze. She knew who that figure was. It was Evelyn. For a moment, the two stared at each other. Evelyn, or what was left of her, seemed different from the last time Emily had seen her. There was something sadder, more resigned about her, as if she had finally accepted her fate. But even so, her gaze was fixed on Emily, as if she wanted to convey something, as if she were asking for help. Emily felt a wave of compassion and sadness. "What do you want, Evelyn?" she whispered, her voice barely audible in the wind. The figure didn't respond, but pointed inside the mansion before disappearing, as if she had never been there. Emily knew it was a call, a final request from Evelyn to resolve what had been left behind. Without hesitation, Emily ran to the police station, where she found Robert organizing some files. He looked up, surprised by her urgent expression. "Emily, what happened?" "I saw Evelyn. She was at the Whitmore mansion. She showed me that there's still something that needs to be done," Emily explained, breathless. Robert frowned. "Are you sure? I thought everything was over after the ritual." "I thought so too, but I feel like something is still unresolved. Evelyn needs us to do something, and I think it's at the mansion. We can't ignore this." Robert hesitated for a moment, but seeing the determination in Emily's eyes, he nodded. "Okay, let's go there, but we need to be prepared for anything." They gathered their flashlights and took a few protective items, just in case, before heading to the mansion. The sun was already setting, and the remaining light cast long, sinister shadows over the old house. As they entered the mansion, the air was heavy, almost oppressive. Every step they took on the creaking floorboards echoed through the empty corridors. Emily and Robert climbed the stairs to the second floor, following the direction Evelyn had shown. At the end of the hallway was a locked door. The wood was worn with age but still solid. Emily felt that whatever Evelyn wanted to show them was behind that door. Without thinking twice, Robert used all his strength to break it open. What they found on the other side was a room completely different from the rest of the mansion. Unlike the dilapidated state of the other rooms, this one was well preserved. Old but well-maintained furniture filled the space, and on the wall hung a large portrait of Evelyn, dressed in her wedding gown, with a look of sadness but also resolve. In the center of the room, on a small table, was a wooden chest. Emily approached it cautiously and, with trembling hands, opened the chest. Inside were letters, diaries, and a wedding ring. Robert picked up one of the letters and began reading it aloud. They were love letters exchanged between Evelyn and Henry, from a time before darkness had consumed his heart. As he read, Emily felt a deep connection to Evelyn, as if she were sharing her pain. This is all that's left of her," Emily whispered. "All the love, the hope, the future she thought she would have. It's all here, trapped in this room, while pain and betrayal became her legacy." But there was more. At the bottom of the chest, wrapped in a piece of cloth, was a small notebook. Emily opened it and found a confession written by Henry. In his final words, he admitted his guilt, not just for killing Evelyn, but for succumbing to madness and despair in his attempt to gain power through dark rituals. He wrote of a curse he had placed upon his lineage, but one he had never truly wanted. Henry was remorseful, Robert murmured, shocked. He knew what he had done, but it was too late. And Evelyn needed us to know that, Emily said, tears welling up in her eyes. She didn't want to be remembered only for the tragedy, but for the love that existed before everything went wrong. Maybe by knowing this, she can finally rest in peace. With the notebook and ring in hand, they left the mansion. Emily knew they needed to take these items to the cemetery, where Evelyn was buried. This would be the true end of the curse, the final act of redemption. At the cemetery, when they reached Evelyn's grave, Emily placed the notebook and ring on the tombstone. The air around them seemed to vibrate slightly, as if time itself were adjusting to allow this final gesture to be completed. Robert placed a hand on Emily's shoulder as she whispered a silent prayer, asking that Evelyn finally find the peace she so deserved. And then, the air grew still, time seemed suspended, and a gentle breeze passed over them, carrying away the sense that something had changed, something had been resolved. "Do you think she's at peace now?" Robert asked, looking at Emily. "I hope so," Emily replied with a sad smile. "I think we finally gave her what she needed, her love, her story. It's complete now." As they walked away from the cemetery, Emily felt a sense of closure. She knew there were no more lurking shadows, no more suffocating fear. Silent Creek could finally start to heal. But Emily knew that Evelyn's story and everything that had happened would never be forgotten. She and Robert had been part of something much bigger, something that would be etched into the town's history. Silent Creek's past was full of darkness, but now there was hope. The final encounter with Evelyn had brought not only peace for her, but also for everyone who lived in the town. And finally, Emily felt that she could move on, knowing she had done what was right. As they walked back home under the starry, cloudless sky, Robert looked at Emily and said, "You know, I think you're the bravest person I know, Emily Turner. I don't think we could have done this without you." Emily smiled, feeling a comforting warmth spread through her chest. "I didn't do it alone, Robert. We did it together, and now we can finally leave this behind." But deep in her mind, Emily knew that legends never truly die. They just change, adapt. And Silent Creek, a town with so many stories, would never be completely free of its ghosts. Final chapter, The Bride's Legacy. Time passed, and Silent Creek began to return to its usual routine. The people, who had once avoided going out at night, now walked the streets with a renewed sense of safety. The nights were clear, without the thick fog that seemed to carry the town's secrets, and the oppressive presence that had loomed over the residents was gone. But despite the calm that had settled in, Emily knew the town would never be the same. What had happened to Evelyn Whitmore, and the curse that had haunted Silent Creek for so long, had become part of the local folklore. Stories of the Spectral Bride were still told, but now with a tone of reverence, almost like a lesson about the dangers of letting hatred and revenge consume one's soul. Emily and Robert had become respected figures in the town, known for having faced what many considered an unexplainable evil. Although they avoided speaking openly about the darker details of their experience, they both knew that what they had lived through was real, and they had done everything possible to protect the town they loved. One afternoon, a few months after the events, Emily found herself once again in the Silent Creek Cemetery. She walked among the old tombstones until she reached Evelyn's grave. She brought with her a bouquet of white flowers, which she would place on the grave as a sign of respect and gratitude. "I hope you're at peace now, Evelyn," Emily murmured as she arranged the flowers on the ground. "Everything that happened, all the pain, I hope it's finally over for you." She stayed there for a few minutes, lost in thought. Evelyn's presence was still felt, but in a different way. There was no more fear, only a silent sadness and the memory of a life that had been cruelly cut short. Robert arrived shortly after, carrying a thermos of coffee. He approached Emily, handing her the drink and placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "How are you?" he asked gently. Emily smiled slightly. "I'm fine. I just needed to come here one more time to say a proper goodbye." Robert nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. He, too, had felt the need to close that chapter, to turn the page and move forward. The town is more peaceful now, but I think everyone still feels a change in the air. It's like something has changed forever, and maybe that's the way it should be. Emily agreed. Legends never truly die, do they? They transform, they adapt, but they always remain. And maybe it's important that Evelyn's story continues to be told, as a reminder. A reminder of what? Robert asked, curious. That love and hate are powerful forces, Emily replied thoughtfully, and that if we're not careful, one can easily turn into the other. Evelyn was consumed by pain, but in the end, she found peace because we finally understood what really happened to her. She wasn't just a vengeful spirit, she was a woman who was betrayed and trapped in a cycle of suffering. Robert looked at Evelyn's tombstone, reflecting on Emily's words. Maybe that's what Silent Creek needs, to remember that behind every legend, there's a truth, something we need to learn so we don't repeat the same mistakes. Emily smiled, feeling lighter than she had in a long time. Yes, I think you're right. And now, I think I'm ready to move on. As they walked away from the cemetery, Emily felt a sense of closure. She knew there were no more lurking shadows, no more suffocating fear. Silent Creek could finally start to heal. But Emily knew that Evelyn's story and everything that had happened would never be forgotten. She and Robert had been part of something much bigger, something that would be etched into the town's history. Silent Creek's past was full of darkness, but now there was hope. The final encounter with Evelyn had brought not only peace for her, but also for everyone who lived in the town. And finally, Emily felt that she could move on, knowing she had done what was right. As they walked back home under the starry, cloudless sky, Robert looked at Emily and said, "You know, I think you're the bravest person I know, Emily Turner. I don't think we could have done this without you." Emily smiled, feeling a comforting warmth spread through her chest. "I didn't do it alone, Robert. We did it together. And now, we can finally leave this behind." But deep in her mind, Emily knew that legends never truly die. They just change, adapt. And Silent Creek, a town with so many stories, would never be completely free of its ghosts. Thank you for following Emily's journey in the mystery of Silent Creek. We hope you enjoyed this story full of mystery and suspense. If you missed any chapter or want to revisit the most thrilling moments, click on the videos to watch the previous episodes. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. See you next time.